Something massive just leaked from inside McLaren. Not a rumor. Not speculation. An internal prototype built entirely outside the public eye. What's in that design? If it's real, it doesn't just break the mold. It might rewrite how F1 cars should be built under the 2026 rules. Because buried in this leak is a system so advanced. Some engineers are calling it regulation-proof. But that's not the most shocking part. The timing of this leak just weeks before the first private tests might be no accident. And what this reveals about McLaren's true intentions could expose a hidden conflict between the FIA and one of its rising giants. Stick around. Because what you'll see in the second half of this video, nobody was supposed to know. And if you're the kind of person who always spots the scandal first, you're going to want to see how this ends. Officially, McLaren hasn't said a word. No renders. No performance targets. Not even a slogan. Just vague comments about progress and a new philosophy dropped in media scrums with no follow-up. But behind that silence, inside the MTC in Woking, something far more calculated is happening. And the people who've seen it say this is not the kind of project you reveal at a press conference. Because what McLaren is preparing may not be built for approval. It may be built for domination. Sources close to the technical division describe a complete structural lockdown. Entire departments move to restricted access zones. Simulation data routed through offline servers. Key suppliers asked to sign extended NDAs with clause extensions until March 2026. This level of secrecy hasn't been seen at McLaren since the early MP4 days. And even then, the firewall wasn't this tight. The obvious question is why? Why is a team that finished 2025 in a relatively open environment suddenly operating like a military contractor? Here's the part that caught the FIA's attention. Back in May of 2025, McLaren officially paused all visible development on their 2025 car. But what wasn't announced publicly was what replaced that program. Multiple independent sources now confirm McLaren didn't just start early on 2026. They never stopped. Since the end of 2024, a quiet subgroup led by Neil Holdy and several ex-Toyota WEC engineers had been working on a parallel chassis under full 2026 constraints well before most teams even finalized CFD baselines. What they built was more than just a mule. It was a modular testbed designed to explore the very edge of the 2026 aero and energy rules. And this is where things start to take a darker turn. Because the data coming out of that rig, data that should have been hypothetical, academic, inconclusive, instead started showing performance deltas that were simply too large to ignore. Not 1/10. Not 2. In simulation runs over Silverstone, the delta against their own 2025 car reached 0.6, with tire models not yet finalized. That's when internal alarms started going off. By July, McLaren had reportedly diverted over 60% of their technical budget into the 2026 program. While Ferrari was still trying to recover from a disastrous mid-season package, McLaren was ordering custom components from two suppliers not currently listed on the FIA's official registry. And here's where it gets really interesting. Those suppliers specialize in high-response mechanical actuation systems. The kind used in aerospace applications for real-time control surfaces. And if that sounds like active aero, it should. But not the kind the FIA approved. If you're wondering why none of this came out sooner, well, maybe it was never supposed to. The leak didn't come from a journalist or a disgruntled engineer. It came apparently from a logistics manifest flagged by a rival team. One that included parts whose specifications did not match any known homologated components for 2026. And yet, those parts were labeled critical for dynamic floor testing. Yes, floor. Because McLaren's most controversial innovation may not be on the wings at all. It may be built directly into the underside of the car. Hidden in plain sight. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Because before we talk about what McLaren may have built, we need to understand what they're actually allowed to build. And that's where the real tension begins. Because even the FIA's own language on what counts as active has one enormous loophole. And that's exactly what we're diving into next. At the center of this controversy is a simple phrase in the FIA's 2026 regulations. Active aerodynamic devices may only be operated by driver input or predefined electronic systems under FIA supervision. That sounds clear. Until you realize what's not in that sentence. Because what McLaren has allegedly built doesn't involve electronics. And it doesn't need the driver to touch anything. According to two sources familiar with the internal simulations, McLaren's 2026 prototype features a FlexFloor system. Not a conventional active aero package, but a structural design that adapts passively to air pressure. The principle is deceptively simple. Under high-speed airflow, parts of the floor subtly deform. channeling vortices toward rear extraction zones. When cornering loads increase, the structure stiffens, realigning the airflow path. No servo motors. No control units. No firmware. Just physics. But physics used as a weapon. This is the trick. Because under current FIA wording, a system that reacts to environmental inputs, and not to driver commands or electronic algorithms, does not fall under the definition of an active device. It's mechanical. It's passive. And that makes it invisible to the regulatory language, at least on paper. Now, if that sounds familiar, it should. In 2019, Ferrari was caught in a storm of controversy over a fuel flow system that technically complied with FIA sensors, while exploiting a timing gap in measurement frequency. The result? A system that delivered legal data while bending physics to the limit of what was visible. It took months for the FIA to react. And by the time they did, the damage was done. McLaren appears to be playing from a similar script. What makes this even more troubling is the scale. McLaren didn't just run isolated CFD models. They built full-floor modules and installed them on test rigs designed to simulate lateral G-forces and load transitions. The data was not academic. It was performance-oriented downforce levels, drag coefficients, heat signatures under stress. All the parameters you'd need, not to prove feasibility, but to validate competitiveness. And the results, according to one insider, were disturbing. Their word, not ours. Even more unsettling? The floor system apparently only works under very specific ride height conditions. Conditions that would be impossible to achieve if the car obeyed conventional damping behavior. Which raises the next question. Is McLaren also altering their suspension system to artificially maintain this critical aerodynamic window? It would explain the sudden surge in high-load torsion bar orders from one of their suppliers. It would also align with internal rumors that McLaren's engineers have developed a passive ride height stabilizer. Not banned, but never used before under modern ground clearance rules. And here's the final twist in this section. Multiple teams have reportedly asked the FIA for clarification on whether mechanical deformation of structural elements counts as intentional aerodynamic effect. The FIA, at least for now, has not responded. Not publicly. Which leaves a dangerous gap between what's legal and what's just not yet illegal. McLaren, it seems, is dancing in that space. Not hiding. Just stepping 1 inch outside the frame. And daring the FIA to follow. But the deeper issue isn't whether this system works. It's who inside the FIA has known about it. And for how long. That's where this story begins to unravel. And it's the next part that may involve more than just technical ambiguity. Because if what we're hearing is true, this floor system isn't just a clever design. It might be a deliberate challenge to FIA authority. Here's where things get serious. Because this isn't just a clever technical loophole. It's a structural test of how much power the FIA really holds in this new regulatory era. Sources close to several manufacturers suggest that McLaren's passive floor design, if allowed to stand, could trigger a flood of similar systems. Each more aggressive, more refined, and more invisible than the last. But instead of responding publicly, the FIA has quietly shifted its language in internal documents. Not in the technical regulations, but in the compliance memos sent to power unit suppliers. And that's where the contradictions start to appear. One document, dated November 2025, refers to aerodynamically responsive components not controlled electronically or by the driver. That's not the language used in the published rulebook. It's softer, more vague, more accommodating. And the reason that matters is because McLaren isn't just building a car. They're building a legal position. One that says, if it's not explicitly banned, and not operated by us, then it's legal. And so far, no one at the FIA has issued a technical directive to dispute it. But behind the scenes, the pressure is building. Ferrari, Red Bull, and even Mercedes have reportedly raised concerns during closed-door meetings with FIA technical delegates. Not because they're shocked, but because they're not ready. They've seen the concept. They understand what it could do. But reverse engineering that kind of compliance-safe flexibility? That takes months. And time is now the most valuable currency in Formula One. McLaren isn't just ahead. They may have created a strategic trap. A system that forces everyone else to either protest or copy. Now here's the political twist. McLaren's executive leadership has been unusually active in recent meetings with the FIA's working group on regulatory implementation. Zak Brown, who has often positioned himself as a reformist voice in F1 politics, has reportedly backed a push to encourage innovation within the spirit of sustainable engineering. A phrase that sounds noble, until you realize it was used verbatim in an internal McLaren document justifying their passive floor architecture. What's emerging is not just a technical battle. It's a political play. McLaren is framing their design not as a breach, but as a preview of what Formula One should reward: smart engineering, efficient solutions, sustainability without compromise. That message has found sympathy in unexpected places. Several FIA insiders, including at least one advisor linked to the 2026 Transition Committee, are said to be open to broader definitions of legal aerodynamic behavior. And why wouldn't they be? A passive system, no hydraulics, no electronics, sounds safer, cheaper, and more eco-friendly. It's hard to oppose that on the surface. But under that surface lies a far more uncomfortable truth. If the FIA does nothing, it sets a precedent. Not just for floor design, but for how far teams can push the edges of the rulebook without tripping an official alarm. Now imagine this. You're Mercedes, or Red Bull, or Audi, and you realize too late that McLaren has spent the last 18 months quietly reinterpreting the architecture of the car. Not chasing marginal gains, but engineering regulatory silence. You can't protest what isn't defined. You can't ban what hasn't been named. And if you try, you risk exposing the fact that the rules weren't ready. That's why, right now, the FIA is under enormous pressure not just to rule, but to delay. Because if they ban the system before Bahrain, they admit their own regulations were weak. If they allow it, they risk handing McLaren a performance window no one else can reach in time. And if they stay silent, they may ignite the most chaotic development race since the blown diffuser wars of 2011. And remember, this is just one part of the car. The floor. There's more. Because if McLaren was willing to gamble on passive aero, what did they build around it? That's what we'll explore next. Because what no one is publicly talking about yet is the way McLaren may be redefining energy deployment itself. The passive floor isn't a standalone trick, and this is where most of the analysis stops short. Because what McLaren appears to be doing isn't just about airflow. It's about orchestration. Multiple systems, mechanical, thermal, and electrical, working together in a closed loop that simulates active behavior, without ever crossing the regulatory line. This isn't cheating. It's systems engineering so layered, so deeply integrated, that even experienced rival teams aren't sure where the advantage begins or ends. Take energy deployment. Under the 2026 rules, cars must manage a radically different power balance. A 50-50 split between combustion and electrical power. That sounds simple. Until you realize the MGUH is gone, meaning energy recovery now comes almost exclusively from braking. McLaren, according to leaked dyno data, has developed a braking system that maximizes rear energy harvesting, without sacrificing entry stability. How? Insiders suggest it's tied to a variable torque application system embedded directly into the rear axle. A kind of pseudo-KERS that adapts real-time to driver input and battery temperature. Not forbidden. Just undefined. This could explain another anomaly noticed during a private test session in late December. Observers at the Navarra circuit, where McLaren quietly ran non-liveried test equipment, reported a strange sound during low-speed deceleration. Not a whine. Not a brake squeal. Something else. A short, pulsed resonance. And while that might seem irrelevant, experts familiar with dyno mapping say it's the audio signature of high-frequency torque cycling. The kind used to maintain battery thresholds under limited regenerative windows. In other words, McLaren may have found a way to pulse-manage energy recovery without exceeding the FIA's strict discharge limits. And that, if confirmed, would change everything. Because unlike Ferrari, who have reportedly taken a conservative path with combustion stability, McLaren seems to be betting on dynamic control. Short bursts of torque, temperature-triggered boost limits, and predictive switching between aero modes based on track sector data. All of this fed by onboard learning algorithms embedded in the ECU. Again, not illegal, but well beyond what the FIA thought was possible in a first-generation 2026 power unit. The governing body expected teething problems. Instead, McLaren might be handing in a fully mature package, months before Bahrain. What this reveals isn't just technical superiority. It exposes a different philosophy. While rivals like Red Bull or Audi are treating the new regulations as a reset, McLaren appears to be treating them as an opportunity to build a closed ecosystem. A car where suspension, aerodynamics, and energy systems don't just coexist. They adapt to each other. The car's mechanical balance changes based on aero load. The aero load adjusts to torque distribution. And torque output fluctuates based on the corner, the tire model, and even ambient temperature. It's not a machine. It's a living system. And here's what's more dangerous. Several FIA staff members assigned to monitor preseason compliance are reportedly not engineers. They're regulatory liaisons, lawyers, project managers, specialists in documentation. In normal seasons, that works. The rules are known. The cars are predictable. But in 2026? McLaren is writing its own language. And unless the FIA has someone on site who can understand how that language functions in real time, the system could go undetected all the way to Melbourne. At that point, it's not about legality. It's about timing. Because you can't retroactively penalize what was never declared illegal to begin with. And still almost none of this has been acknowledged publicly. McLaren has issued no statements. The FIA has published no directives. Other teams are now trapped in a dilemma. Do they publicly protest a system they can't fully explain? Or start re-engineering their own cars under assumptions they don't understand? It's a game of silence. And McLaren, for now, is winning it. But silence doesn't last in Formula One. And the next phase of this battle may not happen on the track, but in a conference room, behind closed doors, before the first race has even begun.